Matthew 24, verse 14. This gospel, Jesus says, Matthew 24, 14, this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. You see that? This gospel of the kingdom becomes, it's a very important phrase. We're not going to unpack all of it right now. We're going to say that for next week when we look at Acts. But the gospel of the kingdom, the good news about the kingdom of God is good news for sinners. Because the kingdom of God brings salvation to those who turn to Christ in faith. And so the gospel is preached, the gospel of the kingdom of God. And it will be preached, Jesus says, to the whole world. And so we look at the parable, we say, how are all the birds of the air going to get to the mustard tree? How are they going to get there? How are they going to find out about it? Simple, preaching. Preaching, that's how. The preaching of the gospel. The progress of the kingdom takes place as the gospel is proclaimed. And this is such a critical truth to understand about the kingdom, because many today think that they can push the kingdom forward through political action or earthly power. They believe if they could just get control of the government. It doesn't have to be the federal government. I mean, that's the long goal. But the short, maybe we just go to a state that doesn't have a lot of people and we bring all of our followers to one city. We try to take over that city. We can bring the kingdom of God to that city. Through political power, we will take over the government and run that town. And then maybe that will go to the state and the national government, and we can get the levers of power. But the kingdom of God advances to all the nations, not by political power, but by gospel preaching. The church does not need more politicians. It needs more preachers. Because the kingdom advances to all the nations, not by political power, but by gospel preaching. And there is today in many places the idea of bringing about something called Christendom. Christendom, it's the idea that we're going to bring the kingdom of Christ into this world in terms of political power and influence, and we're going to take over a state or a city or a nation. And what we need to do if we want to experience the kingdom of God is build Christendom. You got to understand, if an earthly kingdom like that is what you're looking for prior to the return of Christ, your theology has more in common with the Pharisees and scribes of Jesus' day than the New Testament. Because that's exactly what they wanted Jesus to do. Take the levers of power, crush the Gentiles, stone the adulterers, stone the fornicators, get rid of all the bad people, and just set up a kingdom just for us. Jesus reminds us here the kingdom of God does not make progress through political means, nor should it be confused with Christendom. The kingdom of God advances through the proclamation of good news, and that good news has nothing to do with building a Christian nation. That good news is good news for all nations, to bring salvation to all nations. If your goal is to build a Christian nation, your goal is not Jesus' goal, because Jesus is not fixated myopically on one nation. Jesus wants sinners from every nation. And the church's responsibility, right? Proclaim the gospel to all nations. Go, all nations. Make disciples, teaching them. There are so many people today running around trying to establish an earthly kingdom in the name of Christ that Christ wants no part of, because his kingdom is being built through the Spirit-empowered proclamation of the gospel to all the nations. This is how Jesus taught us about the progress of the kingdom. It starts small, it grows to encompass all the nations, and it succeeds in reaching people from all the nations through preaching.